It's an honor to introduce today Bob Miglani and the South Asian MBA Association presented Keynote at the India Conference at Harvard, presented by the graduate students at Harvard University. Bob Miglani is an accomplished executive at Pfizer, and he's been in New York City for over 21 years. He moved to the US in 1979 from India with only $75 and a desire to pursue the American dream, which turns out to be to help his family run a Dairy Queen franchise. For over 25 years, the subject of his first book, titled Treat Your Customers, was based on this idea. Bob's latest book was published in October 2013, titled Embrace the Chaos: How India Taught Me to Stop Overthinking and Start Living. It hit the bestseller list, and we are extremely honored and excited to have him talk to us today about his book and the lessons from his book, Moving Forward in Uncertain Times, How India Taught Me to Embrace the Chaos. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm delighted to be here with you today. Thank you, Rashida, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for the Harvard students for having me here. And thank you for Ketan Shah, the president of South Asian MBA Association, for inviting me to speak as well. I'm delighted to be with you today. The last couple of days, or yesterday, basically, we talked a lot about how India is doing great and wonderful things in business, in sports, in technology, in social services. And today you'll hear a lot about the LGBT community and how that's growing. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a different perspective about how India can be perhaps a classroom for the world that we live in today. We live in a world where there's greater uncertainty, greater unpredictability, randomness, constant randomness, complexity. To talk this morning about politics and geopolitics and multilateral relations between India and the rest of the world. Pretty complicated topic. My head spins when I think about that. On speed, things are moving at faster speed than the last 20 years. And what I want to do is I want to share with you my journey, my story of how I learned to move forward in uncertain times, and share with you some lessons that I learned that might be helpful in your journey. And it's a little bit different perspective, because what it is I don't see India as necessarily a place to do business, and although it's great for those things, I really see it as a wonderful place to rediscover something that's inside of us that can help us in business right here at home in America and in our lives right here at home in America. So let me give you a little bit of background about myself, and then I'll share with you two stories. And at the end, I'll share 3 lessons that I learned that are in my book, Embrace the Chaos. I was born in 1970 in a small village called Rampur. Anybody know Rampur? Muradabad, Bareilly, UP area? So I was born in a very tiny place, and we had nothing. And who knows what it's like not to have anything when you're growing up. A lot of us from India. And we moved to the US when I was 9. And we lived in Queens, like a lot of people do when they first moved to America. We lived in Flushing, off of Casino Boulevard. And I went to public school there in the system. And then we moved to Virginia and New Jersey. I do what kids do my age. We deliver newspapers. We had paper out. I mowed lawns. I don't know if people do that anymore, but I did that. And then I worked at the local Dairy Queen. There was a local Dairy Queen in New Jersey. And does anyone know what a Dairy Queen is? It's a quintessential American piece of American history. It's an ice cream store, and it's more than that. It's a lot of people in America revere Dairy Queen because that's where you take the kids after Little League and soccer. And so I learned to work at Dairy Queen. And then my parents, we saved up enough money over the years. We were struggling, in the beginning. We struggled, but we saved up enough money, and we bought our own Dairy Queen franchise. And that was really for us, the American dream. You work hard every day. You're there, the customers, and then you make money and you put the kids to college. And my sisters and I worked there all the time, and of course we never got paid. I can tell you, not a penny. But the valuable lessons I learned there I took with me in my job in corporate America. I worked at the Dairy Queen, got a college education. My parents, of course, like a lot of Indian parents, be a doctor, right? Be an engineer. And I said, no, that's not for me. I like business too much. And so I went to work for a big company. At that time, it was not so big. and I started my career as a sales representative for Pfizer Inc. In New York City. My territory was Manhattan, and I'd never really been in Manhattan except for the Statue of Liberty, but I got to know it very well. And I sold from door to door, to doctor, and I became a very successful sales representative. I really thoroughly enjoyed working. And speak up a little bit.
Yeah, it's a weird echo if you want to bring it closer.
Okay, thank you. Can you use that better?
Yes, a little bit, not completely.
Okay, I'll try to project as much as I can. So I was doing great for a while. I moved up the corporate ladder, and I grew in my career. I worked in the headquarters. I got to travel the world. I did business in 40 countries. I walked in one day, I would go to Spain, the next day I would go to London and then Paris for meetings to work on projects. I ate at the restaurant on top of the Eiffel Tower. I mean, I had a great career. It was going great. I was working very hard. My wife was in school, and I really got a chance to contribute something very positive to the company. But then something happened. 2007, 2008, and it was the time of the financial crisis. And we had so much uncertainty in the economy. I'd go to work, I would swipe my corporate ID here to this headquarters where I work, and I would hope green light appeared on my turnstile, because there was so much job uncertainty. I'd go into work, the colleague next to me in the office was no longer there, got laid off. The colleague next to me in the right was moved to another place or another division, another country perhaps. There was a lot of change going on. And every time you read the newspaper, more uncertainty, economic uncertainty. You couldn't do anything without fearing for what the future would look like. And I looked at the future, and I saw every path in front of me looked worse than the other. Should I do this with my life? Should I do this with my career? My wife, we had our second child at that time, 2008. She was an eye doctor, and she wanted to open up her business. And it was a difficult time. Should we open up a business? I mean, in this environment, should we do that? We have just a child who's going to manage the kids. How are you going to do this? So it was this worry set in, this anxiety set in about what the future holds. And I was slipping down the spiral of self-doubt and anxiety. And I hear, how can I be this person? I was successful. I was doing really hard. I did all the right things. I got a 30-year mortgage, for a house I could afford. I got an MBA, going to school at night. I worked very hard. I did the right things, I stayed late, but how come the recipe that I signed up to was no longer working? And that caused a lot of stress on me and my relationship, my work. I couldn't figure out how to move forward. And then something happened. And how sometimes you get these moments of providence. So I got a call from a friend of mine. His name is Ben. He's American, he lives in New York City, grew up in the US. And he said, Bob, I'm going to India on a business trip. Can you show me the place? So what do you mean, show me the place? I don't really know it from that perspective as much. He said, no, can you show me around, be my guide? And I said, okay, fine. So I took some time off, and I went to India with him, and we spent about a week or so in India. We met ministers and politicians and CEOs of companies. We took him to delegations in this place and that place, and he toured around, went to a number of different cities. And at the end of the week or so, he said, Bob, I don't get it. How does this place work? It's so confusing. From the roads to going to meetings, people don't say who they are. Who's really in charge? Is it the CEO or somebody else sitting in the back room? How does anything work, from the infrastructure to buying a postage stamp at the post office to buying groceries at the grocery store? How does India work? I don't get it. It's so confusing here. And I smiled and I looked at him and I said, have you ever been to an Indian wedding? And he said, no, what does that have to do with it? I said, well, it's very instructive on how you handle confusing times. And here's what I mean. You go to an Indian wedding, and you've been to an Indian wedding, right? Indian weddings. And it's, first of all, it's late. It's like 3 hours late. Then you get there, there's, you don't know what's on schedule. Nothing goes according to what's on the schedule. There's a lot of confusion. Somebody's crying, somebody's laughing, somebody's praying, somebody's drinking out of a car, in the back of a car. And what's going on? And the flowers are not out on the table, they're on the floor. There's a horse, there's an elephant, it's not for the kids. But I said, maybe 10 hours or maybe 4 days later then, 2 people get married. Everything works out in the end, If you focus so much on what's going to come next, if you focus so much on the order in things, you're going to miss the best of your life. You have to embrace the chaos. And he said, oh, I like that. And I came back on that flight back from India that day. And it wasn't a British Airways flight, it was a United flight. I came back that day, and I realized that's what I needed to learn to do in my own life, right here at home, is I needed to learn to embrace the chaos. And so I got busy, and India became my classroom. Every trip I went to, every conversation I had with somebody in India, by chance or by luck or by choice, I started learning and I started absorbing. And what I wanted to share with you is 2 stories that are lessons, that offer some lessons on how you move forward in uncertain times. Why do you do it? And then I'm going to share with you my 3, if you will, 3 principles that might be helpful for you in your own life, for your work, your business, whatever, to help you move forward as well. So the first story is, and again, this was a reflection period. So I was going and traveling and talking and engaging people. So this first experience was some years ago. I asked my cousin, I said, I'd like to do what locals do here in India. I'm an American as much as the next guy. And I said, I would like to take a bus. And I said, no, you can't take a bus. I said, why not? He said, no, it's crazy, you can't take a bus. I said, no, I insist, I want to take a bus. So he said, all right, fine, let's go. We go to the bus stop, and he says, okay, get ready, start running. So what do you mean? What do you mean? He said, look, the bus is coming. And I look over, and my mouth is on the floor. The bus is coming down this dirt road, completely full. People with their fingernails on the outside of the bus. You've seen this scene before, right? You've seen this scene before, right? It's crazy. And I said, I am not getting on that thing. There's no way. I looked through the dirty windshield, and the driver looked like he had no intention of stopping. He was serious, and he was just going to roll right forward. And I said, there's no way I'm getting on this thing. So in your mind, no way, you can't do this. So the bus goes by, and my cousin was running, and he said, what happened? You didn't get on the bus? It's too full. There's no way, I can't get on this bus. He goes, no, just the way it is, you have to jump on. I said, no way, I'm going to wait for a bus that's less full. He said, well, there's no such thing. You just have to do it. There's no way. I said, no, there's got to be a bus, a little spot, little me, I can fit in, I'm not, I can do this. And he said, no. I said, no, I insist. So I said, okay, fine, wait for the next bus. The second bus starts coming. Same scene, people are hanging by their fingernails. I don't know how they're doing it, but they're just doing it. And my mind took over, right? You know how your mind takes over? It says, no, you can't do this. You're going to get hurt. Don't do it. You're going to fall. You're going to get hurt. You're going to break your knee. You're going to end up going to the hospital. You know how your mind goes from one thought to another, to another, to another? That's what was happening. I was overthinking. And it's, no, you're going to get hurt. You're going to go to the hospital. Did you see the needles they have in the hospitals? They're huge. These hospitals any good? I mean, what's going on? So this mind was overtaking my actions. And so the second bus went by without me on it. And my cousin at this point is very frustrated. And he said, come on, let's call a 3-wheeler, let's get out of here, let's go have some, pani puri or something and have a good time. I said, no, I'm a New Yorker, I can do this. I've done, more important things in my life, more tougher things. So the third bus comes, I'm waiting for, the bus that's less full. Same scene, third bus finally comes, completely full. And again, my mind took over, and said, you can't do this. Why are you doing this? This is a waste of time. You get the idea. You're an executive. You don't need to be doing this. Take a taxi. Get out of here. And I saw, what I noticed was there's a woman next to me, a little old lady, started running. I said, she can do it. I can do it. So I started getting into the motion. So as I started getting into the motion, I realized I wanted to silence the self-doubt in my head. And the way I could do that was I took action. I started moving. And as I started moving, my feet started running. And I eventually caught the bus. I caught a little space, I got on the bus, I squeezed in with a lot of people's hands, and I was about to slip off. Some guy helped me back on the bus. That's the end of my story. Here's what I learned. I learned that, one, if you wait for the perfect bus, it'll never come. Because there is no perfect thing. I think we have to learn to accept that life is not perfect, and if you wait for perfection, you get nowhere in life. The key is to see something coming, no matter how uncertain, unpredictable it is. To seize an opportunity coming, to grab on and move forward and take action. And once you take action, know that someone along your journey will help you get back on that bus. And that to me was very powerful because what it taught me is that, in America, I grew up, I went to business school, you're taught, do this, do that happens. It's very linear. The reality is that life is not linear. We're so used to it here in America. We say, we fly on an airplane, right? We get to choose the seat we sit on, right? I want seat 8D, it's the perfect seat, and this, that, and the other. The reality is you can't control who sits next to you. You can't control if the flight will be late. You can't control these things. You can't control your customers, your colleagues, your bosses. I've tried to control my bosses. You can't control the bosses. You can't. I have a tough time controlling my children. I don't know about you, but you can think that we have control is an illusion. And what I learned is from India and that experience is once you accept that life is not perfect, you can begin to start walking and start moving forward. So that's really powerful for me. That really helped me understand that acceptance is the first stage of learning to move forward in life. So that's one story. The second I want to share with you is I have a friend of mine in Maryland. He's a physician, and he works in the U.S. Navy. He's a retired naval officer, Dr. Patel. And Dr. Patel volunteers now. What he does is he goes to India, and he spends a lot of time in villages and helping people get healthcare, basic healthcare. He says, so I've sponsored some of the work that they've done, and I got a chance to go to one of these villages a couple of years ago. And I go to this village, I'm waiting for the person who's going to show me around, and this person shows up. His name is Prakash. He's a social worker. He lives in the village, and his job is to go to home by hut in this village, and to talk to people about their healthcare problems, to inform them about diabetes, take their blood pressure, get toilets installed in their homes by the government, to move the chula stove from inside their house to outside their house. So he does all this work and social work living in this village. And so it was my sort of day to spend to spend the day with him. My idea to spend the day with him, to learn, see what he does. So I'm in this village, and we go to the first house, and Prakash takes me to the first house. And this woman comes out with her daughter, 7-year-old daughter. She puts her on the cot, the manji, and she says, the woman cries and explains, and Prakash explains this girl has cerebral palsy. And then we go to a next house, somebody has high blood pressure. We go to a next house, somebody has severe hypertension. Go to the next house, somebody is an alcoholic, and the farmer, and has issues with violence and abusing alcohol. From house to house, hut to hut we went to, I noticed more and more problems that you can't solve. Right? Prakash is a social worker. He's not a doctor. He's not trained in healthcare. But what he does is he goes out and helps as he can, because there's no hospitals, there's no doctors in this area. It's really dire circumstances, really tough conditions in this village. And as the day went on, a wave of pessimism sort of came over me. I was drained emotionally. Like, how does this guy do this job? It's so tough. And here I am complaining about my job in New York, and this guy is going through such difficult times. And so at the end of the night, at the end of the day, it was evening, we were headed back into the city, and out of this village, and I offered Prakash a ride back in the car, and after some cajoling, he took the ride, and he said, so I asked him, I said, Prakash, so help me understand, why do you do this job? Why do you do this? It's, you're not a doctor. You can't help these people other than just speak to them and maybe take them to a healthcare facility. Why do you do this? It's so difficult. And he starts explaining to me, taking out a chart. He says, well, tomorrow in this village, I'm going to see this woman. She has high blood pressure. Last time her blood pressure was, this much, and I'm going to check her blood pressure tomorrow. I said, no, Prakash, I mean, why do you do this? Not what you do. My Hindi was not very good, so maybe I lost something in translation. And he kept going back to this woman and saying, I've got to take her blood pressure, this, that, and the other. I was drained, so we just sort of drifted off to sleep for 3 hours. And when we got back to the city, right before we got back to the city, I asked him again, I said, Prakash, I'm trying to understand why you do what you do. Why do you do this? It's so difficult. Why do you persevere with this, challenging role that you have? You could be doing something else that's a little bit more, maybe more money, or do something else. And he looked at me in the eye and he said, because she's waiting for me tomorrow. And then it hit me. We are inspired to get through difficult times in the hopes of of affecting one other person. He moves forward in challenging, tough times because he believes his life can affect one other person. He doesn't have grand notions of purpose. In America, we grew up. Sometimes we think we're going to solve poverty. We're going to solve, we're going to come up with a solution for peace. We're going to come up with big examples of big visions, grand visions of purpose. I don't believe, from my experiences in India, and especially with that day I spent with Miglani, that purpose has to be so grand. It doesn't have to be so grand. It can be as simple as helping one other person, get through difficult times. And that purpose often is something that helps guide us through uncertainty. When you are serving somebody else, whether it's a customer or your boss, or you're trying to do something really valuable, you can get through anything. Because that purpose is what's going to pull you forward. Oftentimes we're pushed out of bed, right? I've got to go to this meeting, I've got to go to this class, I've got to do this, I've got this responsibility. But how often are we pulled forward for a meeting that's so powerful as affecting somebody else? And so that's what I'm saying today to you, is that when you're going through uncertainty, when you're going through changes and chaos in your life and in a business, look at who you're serving. What is it for? Find out the deep meaning with why you're doing this, and that will help you get through very difficult times. So those are the two stories I have. I have other stories in my book that might be helpful to you. I spent a day in the field with a sales representative for Pfizer in one of the toughest markets in the country, in Mumbai, and what Doc taught me about resiliency. I spent some time with this woman in India who decided to get married to a man she had only met in 2 hours, and what that teaches you about having faith. I spent time in the mountains with a guru by chance, and I thought he was going to take me for a ride and take my money. But I learned something I asked him a fundamental question. Which direction do you go to in life? How do you know which direction you go to? And what he taught me was really interesting. I'll leave for the book. So when you're going through these difficult times, I think I'd like to leave you with 3 things that might be helpful for understanding how to move forward. I think the first is, in a nutshell, is accept. Accept that life and business, things are not predictable, and it's more uncertain than ever before. It's complicated, it's very, very fast, and randomness sets in, and you have to accept that nothing is perfect. Once we accept that life is not perfect, you can sort of move on. The second is, don't overthink. Don't overcomplicate. Don't try to predict. We spend so much of our time in business school and in the business world, trying to predict what can happen, if you take a certain action. So I realized that it's so complicated. The world is so complex these days. Billions of people making different moves and different moves and different moves. You can't possibly know what's going to happen. And what happens is, if you overthink, time slips away. And the next thing you know, you're at a certain point in your life and you're like, oh, man, I wish I would have done that many years ago. So don't overthink. Don't overcomplicate. Don't try to predict the future. And the third is take action. Move forward. What action does, what moving forward does, is it helps us create our own certainty. Right? So what happens is, you move forward and you know immediately whether or not you took the right action or you didn't. You get feedback. Right away, you get feedback. And if you didn't take the right action, you can figure out which way to go. So I would say is participate, move forward, and take action. And finally, let me leave you with this thought, which is this: that oftentimes in our lives we're going to go through chaos. Right? It's just a fact of the way it is. What I learned from my book and my experience is that you don't necessarily have to go to wonderful institutions such as this place we're in today, or to India, but you often have to go to where we overlook the solutions, which is in ourselves. We know which way we have to go. We just have to have the faith and the courage to be able to move forward. And I want to just sort of say, finally, is that as you're going out, and a lot of you are in the master's program here at Harvard, before you go and master the world of business or government, what have you, that it's very good, it's very important to master yourself. And I hope that this talk today and learning to embrace the chaos was very helpful to you. And I thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions you might have. Yes, gentlemen.
Well, for the past, certainly all yesterday, we've been hearing about scalability, and you seem to be known, certainly, as you're in the epicenter of that kind of thinking. Do you speak at the business school on this? And what kind of that? And you certainly should hear it.
Yes, thank you very much. No, I haven't spoken to the business school yet. I speak mostly now about my book to companies and corporations who invite me to come to speak. Thank you very much. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Thank you so much for that inspirational and entertaining talk. Two really quick questions. One is, I think human nature tends to move toward being more risk averse. I think that's a protective mechanism. So can you give us an example of where you took a risk, the outcome was not positive, and how you overcame that? And the second question, when you made that decision to go to India for a week, you had a brand new baby, wife, all that stuff. What was your wife's reaction when you made that decision? It all worked out well,
Yes.
you know, at the time.
Yeah. And my wife is wonderful and very supportive. She's been wonderful. I think the question is, is risk. How do you? Is this microphone on? How do you manage risk? And we tend to be a risk-averse culture. I think this concept, I've struggled with this myself, is that the ego, if you will, if you go back to sort of Young and some others who came before us, is that the ego is attached, right, from the old days, right, from caveman days, where don't go out outside the cave, there's a little dinosaur out there, so it's there to protect us in some sense. But we live in an environment today where we are flooded with information that we see on our phones and the New York Times, whatever newspapers, that makes us feel, that there's more uncertainty, right? And it might be true, it may not be. I don't know. The reality is that everything that we've been told now is a risk. Everything. And so, what do you not do? You can't chew gum without saying, you're going to get this problem. So, what I've learned is, and I'll give you an example of, I did this beginning of my career, when I first started looking for a job, and how many of you are going to look for a job soon? So I'll tell you my quick story about risk and a job. So 1992 was a recession, and I graduated from college, and I looked for a job, and I applied for all these jobs, and I would get these rejection letters. In the old days, you would apply for jobs and by paper, by letters. And I got this one rejection from this company, and I decided to call up the person whose name was signed to it. It was a vice president of sales. And so I decided to call that office, and I got to the secretary. And she answered the phone. I said, yes, my name is Bob Miglani. I'd like an interview. How do you get our number? Well, you sent me a letter, a very nice letter. And I said, I'd like an interview, please. And she said, no, he doesn't have time. I'm sorry, you have to go to HR. So I said, thank you very much, on the phone. I called her tomorrow. I called her the next day. I called her the next day. I called her the next day. I called her for 30 days. I said, I just want a shot. I just want an interview. That's all I want. I mean, here was a kid. I worked at the Dairy Queen. I came from India. I had nothing. I had nothing to lose, right? And so I said, what do I have to lose? So I kept calling and calling, and finally she said, fine, I'll put you through to Hank. He picked up the phone, says, yes, I'll give you an interview. Be at this date, this time for this interview. I went on this interview, and I got the job. And long story about how I got the job, but I got the job, so I was able to do that. And then fast forward, there was a point in my career where I also was doing very well. But I saw some change in the environment. So I had this idea of a new role in the company, a new department. And I didn't have to take the risk to pitch that, but I pitched it. I pitched it for a year and a half went by, and I took a big risk, leaving my job and trying to create this new role. And I did it very successful, and I was able to move up and it was doing great. But the point is, there are going to be points where you think the risk is too high, right? The risk of failure is too high. But what I've learned is that you will never know for sure unless you do it. It's all going to be in your head. And sometimes your mind is going to eat you up because it's saying, don't do it. And you want to do it. You want to do it. You know you need to do it. And they say that the other side of pain is this wonderful place called fulfillment. And that's where I think we have to look at risk and saying, how bad do you want it? You know? And how willing are you to get to that place in your life? And that's what, for me, I think was very helpful to say, I want it badly, I want to be, you know, this kind of person, I want to succeed in my career. And so that taking that risk was not necessarily a risk, but you make that choice. And we have that choice to make, I think, you know, yeah. And finally, just, you know, my wife was very supportive. She said, okay, get out of town, you know, for a while, leave me alone, because she was very good at handling the kids. Thank you very much.
Yeah. One thing really interesting I found is that, that this whole, the new consumerist phase, the competitive feeling where everyone wants to control everything.
Yes.
And the talk which you have given, it releases a person from that to be a control freak and start enjoying and living life and accepting. And I think it's a beautiful thought.
Thank you very much. I'll give you a quick example. It's in my book. It's one of the best stories in the book. You're going to love the story. It's very funny. But it's I was in India and I was at this wedding. It was my brother-in-law's wedding. And it's the notion of control. And I was trying to control this wedding, which you cannot control in India wedding. And ultimately, it was very futile because you realize that, you know, and that's really the core message of my book is that we think we have control, right? We think we have so much control. And when we don't have, the thing about uncertainty is it scares us because we feel loss of control, right? When organizational change happens in your job, which is going to happen. If you're going to work in any business, you're going to have massive change, right? All the time. And what happens is you lose control and it stresses you out. What I realize is we have less control than we think. And that what we ought to be controlling is not other people, but ourselves. You know, the mind, our thoughts, our words, and our actions. That's where we ought to control. You know, there's a wonderful serenity prayer that says basically the same thing, which is you control the things you can. You know, and give me the power to control the things I can. You know, or the things you can, control the things you can. So I think that's really a very good point that you're saying. Any other questions?
Hi. I feel like one of the biggest problems that we now face is the awareness with so many choices. It's almost like a choice paradox where there are so many choices that choose it all. I mean, unlike India where there are fewer choices. I mean, what advice would you give for trying to sort of make career choices and people starting out who have too many passions?
Yes.
What sort of advice would you give?
No, it's a very good question. It's and I have a chapter in the book about that. When I met the guru, who said the same thing, choice. Because he gave me the example of gods in India. There's a lot of choices, right? Which do you pray to? Right? Which do you pray to? You pray to this one or that one? And you start praying to this one, your mind gets distracted. Should I be praying to this one? Well, he's doing really well. Maybe I ought to pray to that guy. It's that kind of. But I think it's a really tough issue these days, especially when we see other people. There's so much of our direction in life, often, I find, is distracted by seeing other people succeed. She did. I can do that. She's not as smart as I am, or something. So I think that's one part of it. I think the key message for me, and I learned in my journey about choice, is that you might say something that you think you want to do, but deep inside you know what you really want to do. I mean, at dinner last night, I had this wonderful student here from who might be here, and I said, "What do you want to do?" And he gave me this idea, and then he sort of switched back and said, "What I really would like to do." And I saw the passion in his eyes. I saw the smile in his face. And he said it was just a very simple thing. He said, "I really want to do this." And I said, "Well, what are you waiting for?" And so I think we have to look at what we really are about and what our story we want to share with the world, and the story, the legacy you want to leave behind that makes you feel meaningful. See, often we go after money, right? You say, "Oh, okay, MBA, I'm going to make this much money, I'm going to do that." And that's fine because we all have bills to pay. We all want to grow and succeed, and it's a good thing to do that. But I think often we lose the sight of the fact that what makes us get up in the morning is not going to be the paycheck. It's going to make a positive contribution to the place you work, to the people that you work with, and the lives you lead. That is what's going to drive you, and that's going to help you narrow your choice. When you say, you know what, I know I can make a difference if I go out and speak, if I go and represent my voice, or if I go and share what I've learned on this problem and solving a problem. I think that's a great way to clarify and narrow down your choice. Hopefully that helps.
Hi, my name is Secretary. You were talking about in your speech how you called the person for 30 days, so which means you have a lot of drive and you're a fire because you have a vision and a goal. Have you ever had to come out in your drive or take no for an answer? How do you cope with that?
That's a good question. You know, I think what happens is as you get older, your drive dies down a little bit. You know, because you know, just old as a faith, this sort of notion of risk, and you feel secure about it. I think you know, being able to accept rejection is a very important thing to do. You know, I think there's some points in life where you hit a brick wall, and that brick wall is not movable. You know, it's just not movable. And sometimes the key message I have is, if you dwell on it too much, you know, you're going to find yourself in a very negative place. If you dwell on a rejection letter that you received from an employer, or you know, you broke up in a relationship or whatever, you know, if you dwell on it so much, and if you overthink it, the mind will consume you, and you will find yourself in a very dark place. It's hard to get out of that place. So the key is, again, I go back to my 3 principles. Accept that it happened. Don't overthink it, and move on. That's it. That's really it. I mean, if you focus on it so much, try to analyze. I'll give you an example. You know, my wife runs a small business in our town where I live in New Jersey, and she's an IHOP. It's a small business, and she had a really major setback last year. Something happened, very drastic. You know, and both of us were really, you know, down. So what happened? Why? Why did this happen to us? You know, you sort of analyze it. And then time goes by, and you're like, wait a minute, what am I doing? It happened already. If you learn to accept it, you know, and not dwell on it so much, and say, you know what, let's get to work. Let's do something. Once you start putting your hands and feet into motion to something else, that completely moves away your mind, because your mind has nothing else to chew on. So your mind is something that I would say, you know, it needs something to chew on. Give it something good, or give it something bad. It's your choice. But know if you give it something bad, it's going to find itself in a very dark place. But if you give it something good to chew on, right? Something to work on, where your hands and feet are contributing to something, project, work, whatever that might be, then you're completely into that zone, and you feel fulfilled, and you feel like you've actually made a difference. So I would say it's just accept, don't overthink, and move on to something that you really care about. Hopefully that helps.
Hi. I just wanted to say thank you, being a person of Indian origin who was raised in the, sorry. Hi. Being a person of Indian origin raised in the U.S., I related to a lot of what you said, especially kind of the culture shock that you might experience in India, but then accepting that everything is fine the way it works. I was wondering if you thought there were certain cultural factors in India that caused people to embrace chaos more?
I think the cultural factors, you mean sort of their attitudes, people's attitudes, and
or maybe, I guess, institutions in society or attitudes as well.
yeah. Well, often what I've seen is that Indians have sort of, you know, you go to a line, it's a great example. You know, there's no line. You sort of, you have to figure it out. And same thing, you know, you go to roads and you go to meetings, and there's just this notion that the walls don't exist. That's a wonderfully freeing experience. You know, it's like, you know, the parable is this, somebody said some time ago, you have to be like water, right? You have to be fluid, and you have to adapt. And I think that nature is a really powerful one. Because Americans, we see this, you know, often, and we're shocked by it. You know, because how can this be? This is chaos. How can it work? It shouldn't work. The whole place should not work. That's what I've been told, you know, about India. But it works somehow. And what I notice is that cultural feeling of acceptance. I go back to this notion of acceptance. You know, people just learn to accept the conditions they're in. They're in tough conditions, they accept it, and they keep going. And that harsh acceptance, sometimes it's a very sad acceptance, but I think it can be a very positive thing. When you accept it, that is something that can help you sort of move forward. I think those are the traits that I think are very powerful for Indians. Especially nowadays when you go, and things are getting better, obviously in India, where there's lines and there's queues and all those sort of things. But generally, I think those are the kind of things that people are very, fluidity of the people of India, I think, are very important to use and adapting in a culture like America.
I came a little late, but I don't think I missed anything. I think I got the message, and that was a very good message. Like, just move on, don't overthink. But if you want to help some other person, the confusion is whether you help one person or do I want to save them?
Yes.
Take a green path.
Right.
So I think how to help the single person. That is, where to start. That is still the issue, but.
Yes.
I think I'll read your book and try to find out where to move.
Well, I understand what you're saying. You have this vision of, trying to do good things for humanity. What I learned is, and Gandhiji said it very well. It begins with us, right? But I found, in my work, I work in business. It's about the customer. I always go back to is what does the customer need? What does the customer want? And that's always been very helpful, sort of a compass for the kind of things you want to change. Thank you. Yes.
So after you had your trip in India, right?
Yes.
You developed this really Zen-like attitude towards chaos. Why didn't you come back, quit your job at Pfizer, and go into an entrepreneurial venture? Like, what was the reason for not disrupting yourself professionally, so as to say?
Well, I like my job. I really do. I really enjoy it. I've been with Pfizer 21 years, and I really love it. It's a great job. But you know what? I'll tell you two answers to that question. First is that I enjoy it. The second is that I used my journey in this book, that I wrote about in this book, to help me grow my career. Okay, so as a result of my experiences in there, what would happen is you go through so much disruption in corporate America these days. You freeze. And so what happens is there's not a lot of new initiatives that come out. So I said, you know what, I'm not going to listen to the gossip. I'm not going to get into the negative place where a lot of people are just sending out resume after resume. I'm going to get back to work. I'm going to figure out what I can really do. And so that's what I did. And I was able, because of my sort of ethic and work and learning, I was able to do a very big project and very big success in my job. So that really helped grow me in my career. Where it takes me, I don't know. I mean, that's sort of the other question. I've been getting invited to speak to companies and things like that. So that might be something I want to do later on. I don't know yet. I'm not, perfect, and that's okay. Every day is a challenge where you learn and you grow. So, but I think the bottom line is, if you like what you do, just keep doing it. And if you want to do something else, it's up to you to do it. And that's where I am right now. Hopefully answered.
Yep. Okay, just
yes.
maybe one more question.
Sure, one more question.
I come from India and I've been working in the education sector in India. My question is that the education itself in India is very structured and regimented. So there are lines in schools. So what happens when we go out as Indians and we're talking about cures? So is it real cures is my question, because in schools we're not trained. I mean, we're really in a very regimented structure.
Right.
So what really creates that cures? Is it a real cures?
Well, it's a good question. I'll leave it up to philosophers to figure that out. My observation, is that when you leave the school, you still have to go on a certain road. And that road, might have different animals and different, things happening. There's a strike that happens. You go to anywhere you go to, there's people, you have something called entropy. Entropy is a second law of thermodynamics. It's in physics. And basically what it says is, as you have more players into a tightly wound system, which is life on Earth today, more people being born, you have more actions being taken, and therefore there's greater complexity. So the complexity level is so high. So, very simple example. You go on the road in India, you have a strike by a political party. Somebody shuts off the power. You know, somebody's in a traffic accident. There's so many things that happen in a country of 1.3 billion people that you just cannot predict what's going to happen. And so when you leave that school, sure, you might be early, but when you go home, you got to make it home. And while you're going home, your food might be cut off, your water might be cut off, might be bad. I mean, we've seen the power outages in India of 500 million people some years ago. So it is chaos in the sense that it's unpredictable, and it's random, it's intertwined, and it's complex. So when I first started doing research on this book, I came across this concept of chaos theory, and it has this notion of entropy. But the positive part of chaos theory is something called the butterfly effect. I don't know if anybody heard of it. So the butterfly effect essentially says that if you take one action, right, you can't predict what can happen. I look at that in a very positive way. That this is the time for us to move forward and take more action, because you can't predict who's going to be successful and who's not. You just don't. You can't. So if you stand still and don't take action, you're losing out greatly, because the system is so complicated. And I think that's the issue that I have, is that the hotels are very organized, the structures might be very organized, but most of India, and even today in life, could we have predicted the financial crisis in America? It's a very organized system. We couldn't have. I mean, The Black Swan by Nicholas Taleb, fabulous book if you ever read it, fabulous. But you can't predict what can happen. And so what I'm saying is that you might have this notion of a comfortable feeling of a certain environment of control and order, which is fine. But generally, things are, in my observation, are very unpredictable. So, thank you very much for your time. We have the books to give away. They can over there ask them if you want to grab a copy.